Lena Carter was a 24-year-old art student finishing her last semester at a college in Seattle. She had her future planned graduation, marriage to her longtime fiancé Ryan, and a stable life ahead. But lately, that plan felt heavy, like she was following a script that no longer fit her. Ryan was kind but distant, too busy talking about job interviews and house loans to notice that Lena's heart was slowly losing color. That October morning, the classroom buzzed with chatter about the new substitute professor. Their usual instructor had gone on sabbatical, and a replacement was coming in for the rest of the term. Lena expected someone ordinary, someone who'd just assign projects and leave early. But when she walked in, she froze. Standing at the front of the room was Ethan Rhodes. He was in his early 30s, with quiet confidence and a warmth that instantly drew attention. He wasn't like other teachers. His sleeves were rolled, his hair a little messy. And his eyes carried something deep, like he'd lived through the kind of stories people only painted about. The moment he spoke, the class fell silent. Art, he said, isn't about talent, it's about honesty. If you can be honest on the canvas, you'll be an artist. His words weren't just instructions. They felt personal. Lena leaned forward without realizing it. For the first time in months, she felt awake. As the class began painting, Ethan moved between the students, watching their work. When he stopped beside Lena's desk, her heart raced. He studied her half-finished landscape, soft hills, and a pale sky and said, "You see things differently. You don't just copy what's there. You're trying to show what it feels like." His voice was low and calm, but those words hit her like a wave. No one had ever said something like that to her before, not even Ryan. She nodded quietly, pretending to focus on the canvas, though her hands trembled slightly. When the class ended, she stayed behind, pretending to clean her brushes. Ethan was packing up, humming under his breath. The late afternoon light fell across his face, and Lena caught herself watching. She felt foolish, but something about him fascinated her, not because he was handsome, but because he seemed to understand a world she didn't know existed. That evening, she sat in her apartment, staring at her phone as Ryan texted about a new job lead. She replied with polite encouragement, but her mind wasn't on him. It kept drifting back to the classroom, to the smell of paint, to the way Ethan's words had made her chest tighten. Over the next few days, Ethan's class became the highlight of her week. His lessons were nothing like the usual lectures. He talked about emotion, about truth, about the way art could reveal who you really were. "If your painting doesn't scare you a little," he said once, "you're not being honest enough." Lena laughed along with the others, but inside she knew he was talking to her. One afternoon during a class exercise, Ethan asked everyone to draw something that made them feel alive. Lena hesitated. She didn't know what to draw. After a long pause, she began sketching the ocean's stormy, restless sea under a heavy sky. She didn't realize she had tears in her eyes until Ethan stopped by her desk. "That," he said softly, pointing at her painting, "is honesty." Their eyes met briefly. It was only a second, but it left her breathless. After class, she walked home through the autumn chill, her thoughts a storm. She knew she shouldn't be thinking about him. She had Ryan, who loved her and had been with her since freshman year. But lately, their relationship felt like an old painting, faded, familiar, safe. Ethan made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Still, she told herself it was just admiration. She respected his talent, his passion. It was harmless. That's what she repeated every night as she tried to sleep, staring at the ceiling while rain pattered against the window. A week later, the class visited an art exhibit downtown. Ethan led them through the museum, explaining the stories behind each painting. At one point, he stopped in front of a piece that showed a woman standing in the rain, reaching for something just out of frame. "This," he said, "is about longing. Not for love, not for a person, but for clarity. Sometimes we confuse one for the other." Lena didn't know why, but those words hit too close to home. When she looked at the painting again, she felt like the woman was her. She wondered if Ethan knew that too. As the semester went on, Lena's paintings grew bolder, more emotional. Her classmates noticed. Even Ryan complimented one she brought home, though he joked that it looked a little sad. Lena just smiled and said it was supposed to. Ethan continued to challenge her in subtle ways. He never crossed a line, never said anything inappropriate. The way he looked at her sometimes like he saw everything she was too scared to say made her heart skip. One day after class, he stopped her as she packed up. "Lena," he said, "you have a rare gift. Don't waste it trying to please people. Paint what scares you. Paint what you dream about." She wanted to ask, "Do you mean you?" But she didn't. Instead, she smiled, whispered thank you, and hurried out before her emotions betrayed her. That night, she sat by her easel at home, unable to focus. Every brushstroke seemed to form his image, his eyes, his hands, his calm voice. She hated that she couldn't control it. She was supposed to be loyal, focused, responsible. But around Ethan, her heart didn't follow rules. It followed warmth. The next morning, she saw Ryan at the cafe near campus. He was cheerful, talking about wedding venues. She tried to listen, but his words faded behind the noise of her own thoughts. She realized painfully that she hadn't felt excited about their future in months. She wanted to be fair to him, but she didn't know how to explain that something inside her had changed. Back in class, Ethan introduced a new project, Paint the Truth You Hide from Others. The room went quiet. He smiled faintly. No wrong answers, just honesty. As everyone got to work, Lena stared at her blank canvas. For the first time, she knew exactly what she wanted to paint, but she couldn't. It was too risky, too personal. When she looked up, Ethan was watching her. Their eyes met for a long, silent second, and then he looked away. That moment burned in her memory. As she walked home later, her thoughts swirled. She knew she was standing at a dangerous edge, caught between comfort and curiosity, between love and something that felt like freedom. She told herself she could handle it, that she wouldn't let it go too far. But deep down, she already knew the truth. Something had started that she couldn't easily stop. And the hardest part? She didn't want to. The weeks after that moment passed quickly. But for Lena, every class with Ethan felt like a secret she was keeping from the world. She arrived early, always pretending it was to practice, but really, it was because she wanted a few quiet minutes before others came in to hear his voice, feel that calm energy that surrounded him. She tried to convince herself it was only about art. But her heart knew better. Ethan continued to push his students. But he always seemed to focus more on Lena. It wasn't favoritism. It was as if he saw something in her she didn't yet see in herself. One afternoon, he asked the class to paint a memory that still haunted them. "Don't think about making it pretty," he said. "Just make it real." Lena stared at her blank canvas. Her mind flooded with images, arguments with Ryan, the pressure to be perfect, the quiet emptiness that had settled between them. Slowly, her brush began to move. When she finished, her painting showed a cracked mirror reflecting to faces, hers and Ryan's, both fading at the edges. Ethan walked by, studying the piece. "That," he said quietly, "is honesty." His voice was soft, but it felt like it reached straight into her chest. "Most people hide behind color. You didn't." She looked up at him and whispered, "It's not beautiful." He smiled slightly. Truth rarely is. From that day, something shifted. Ethan wasn't just her teacher anymore. He had become a mirror for everything she'd buried inside. And Lena, despite trying to fight it, found herself drawn deeper into his world. After class one day, she stayed behind to ask about an upcoming gallery assignment. The room was empty except for the two of them. The rain outside made the windows tremble, and the air smelled like paint and turpentine. Ethan leaned over her desk, pointing at her sketchbook. "Your lines are too careful," he said. "You're trying to control something that wants to be free." He gently took the pencil from her hand and drew over her sketch, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was brief, but enough to make her pulse race. He looked up, their faces suddenly close. "See?" he said softly. "It's okay to let go." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. For a moment, the world outside vanished. She could hear only the sound of rain and her heartbeat. Then Ethan stepped back, his expression unreadable, as if realizing how close they had come to crossing a line neither of them should. The silence was heavy. Lena picked up her things quickly. "Thanks for the help," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Anytime," he replied, though his tone was different, no more guarded, more careful. That night, Lena couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. She wasn't foolish. She knew the situation was wrong. Ethan was her professor. She was engaged. But every logical thought fell apart when she remembered the warmth in his eyes, the way he made her feel seen. Ryan loved her, yes, but Ethan understood her. And that was something love alone hadn't given her in a long time. A few days later, the class prepared for an art show where students would display their best work. Ethan announced that he'd personally select one student's painting to represent the class at a city exhibition. Everyone wanted that chance. Lena tried to focus on the competition, not the feelings she was trying to bury. For hours, she painted layer after layer of emotions she couldn't say aloud. When she finally finished, she stepped back, exhausted. The painting was of a stormy sky breaking open to light. It wasn't about Ethan, not exactly, but it carried his influence, his voice, his challenge, to be honest. During review day, Ethan walked slowly along the rows, studying every student's work. When he reached Lena's painting, he didn't say anything at first. Then, quietly, he said, "You've finally stopped hiding." Her chest tightened. "So, do you like it?" "I don't just like it," he said, meeting her eyes. "I feel it." Those words stayed with her long after she left class. For the first time in years, she felt proud not for being perfect, but for being real. Later that week, Ethan stopped her after class again. "I'm recommending your painting for the exhibition," he said. "It deserves to be seen." Her heart skipped. "Really? You think it's good enough?" He smiled. "It's not about good enough. It's about truth. And you found yours." That night, Lena called Ryan to tell him the news. He congratulated her, but sounded distracted, too busy with work to really listen. After the call, she sat alone, her excitement fading into quiet sadness. The person she wanted to share her happiness with didn't seem to care. But Ethan had noticed he always noticed. The next day, when she entered the classroom, Ethan looked up from his desk and said, "You seem tired." "Just a long night," she replied. "Art can take a lot from you," he said softly, "especially when it's honest." Their eyes met for a moment that felt longer than it should have. Neither of them said anything more, but the connection between them deepened, silent yet undeniable. As the exhibition approached, Lena grew nervous. Ethan offered to help her prepare. One afternoon, they stayed late to frame her piece. The campus was almost empty, the sky outside turning gold with sunset. Ethan carefully placed the frame on the table. "You've grown more than any student I've taught," he said. Lena smiled. "Because you pushed me." "Maybe," he said, glancing at her. "Or maybe you just needed someone to remind you what you were capable of." Their hands brushed as they lifted the frame together. The contact was brief, but her breath caught again. The tension between them felt stronger than ever, quiet but powerful, like a song playing just below hearing. "Thank you," she whispered. He hesitated, then said softly, "Don't thank me. Just keep painting." But as their eyes met, they both knew there was more behind those words, something neither dared to admit. When Lena finally left that evening, the world outside felt brighter, sharper, more alive. She walked home through the cool air, her heart racing with confusion and guilt. She knew what she felt wasn't right, but it was real. And she couldn't pretend anymore that Ethan was just her teacher. The next morning, she saw Ryan again. He talked about wedding invitations and weekend plans, but his words drifted past her. She smiled, nodded, said all the right things, but inside she felt like two people. The one Ryan knew and the one Ethan had unknowingly awakened. As she sat in class that week, she realized how much had changed in just a month. The classroom had become her escape, Ethan her quiet anchor. And though she tried to keep things professional, their eyes kept finding each other's short glances that said everything words couldn't. Lena knew this couldn't go on forever. But she also knew she wasn't ready to walk away. And deep down, she suspected Ethan wasn't. Either the rain poured heavily that Friday afternoon, the kind that made the entire campus look like it was wrapped in silver mist. Only half the students showed up for class. And Ethan's calm voice filled the quiet room as he gave instructions for their final project. Lena sat near the window, her sketchbook open, but untouched. Her mind wasn't on her work, it was on him all week. She had tried to distance herself to remind herself that he was her teacher and nothing more. But every time she saw him, that effort fell apart. Something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her work like it mattered, kept pulling her back in. As class ended, Ethan told everyone to pack up. "You can leave your brushes on the rack," he said. "I'll clean up after." Most students left quickly, eager to escape the rain. Lena stayed behind, pretending to finish her project. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Ethan noticed. "You're not running from the storm?" he asked with a small smile. She shook her head. "I like the rain. It makes everything feel quiet." He nodded, walking closer. "Sometimes quiet is good." The silence between them grew heavy. He began cleaning the brushes at the sink, and she joined him without being asked. For a while, the only sounds were the water running and the rain tapping against the windows. It felt too peaceful for how fast her heart was beating. "You're painting," Ethan said suddenly. "The one with the storm and the light. It's different from the rest. You're not afraid to show pain anymore." Lena looked down at her hands, wet with paint. "Maybe because I feel too much of it lately." He turned to face her, his expression soft. "Pain isn't weakness, Lena. It means you're alive." She met his eyes. "It doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm breaking." He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes breaking is how we finally see who we are." "Ah." His voice was low, warm, and so close she could hear his breath. The classroom suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Lena swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he said. "But you don't have to go through it alone." For a moment, they just stood there, teacher and student, both caught in a storm neither planned to enter. She wanted to step back to stop this before it went too far, but her heart didn't listen. "Ethan," she whispered. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same struggle, the same unspoken pull. Then he took a small step closer. "You should go," he said softly, almost to himself. But she didn't move. Her breath trembled. "Please, don't stop," she whispered before she could think. He froze. The words hung in the air. "It's fragile and dangerous." Then the door handle rattled. Both of them jumped apart as another teacher stepped inside, holding a clipboard. "Oh, I didn't realize someone was still here." Ethan cleared his throat quickly. "Just finishing up," he said, keeping his voice steady. Lena's cheeks burned. She turned away, pretending to wipe the table, her hands shaking. The other teacher smiled politely and left just as fast, but the moment was already ruined. The air that had felt warm a second ago now felt heavy with guilt. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. Then Ethan said quietly, "You should go home, Lena." She nodded, gathering her things without looking at him. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should." As she reached the door, he called after her. "Lena." She stopped but didn't turn around. "Be careful with your heart," he said. Her eyes stung. But she just nodded and walked out. The cold rain hit her face the moment she stepped outside, but she didn't care. She walked quickly, her mind spinning. She knew what almost happened wasn't right. They hadn't done anything, but it still felt like a line had been crossed. A dangerous line that could ruin both of them. When she got home, Ryan was there waiting, smiling like always. He told her about his day, about how his boss was considering him for a promotion. She smiled back, said all the right things, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face. The way he looked at her before they were interrupted. The way he said, "Be careful with your heart." She barely slept that night. Every time she tried to push him out of her thoughts, her mind pulled him closer. It wasn't physical, it was emotional, something deeper. Something that scared her because it felt real. The next few days in class were tense. Ethan acted completely normal, professional as always. He didn't look at her for too long, didn't linger when passing by her desk. It was as if he'd built a wall overnight. But that distance hurt more than anything else. Lena focused on her final project, forcing herself to paint. The colors on her canvas were darker, now deep blues, broken gold, the reflection of a heart caught between two worlds. Every brushstroke felt like a confession she couldn't speak out loud. At the end of class one afternoon, Ethan walked over and stood behind her quietly. "That's beautiful," he said softly. She didn't turn around. "It's not finished." "Neither are you," he replied. His words made her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, anything, but before she could, another student called him over. The moment passed and he walked away. By the last week of the semester, the tension between them had settled into silence. They both knew they were standing on the edge of something that could destroy their peace, and neither wanted to take that step. On the final Friday, the rain returned, just like the day they were almost caught. The classroom was nearly empty again. Lena stayed until the last student left, then stood there quietly, unsure whether to say goodbye or thank you or something else entirely. Ethan looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "You're going to do great things, Lena. Don't let fear make your choices for you." She nodded, her throat tight. "And you?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "I already made mine." For a moment, neither moved. The rain hit the window harder, and she could feel tears forming, but didn't let them fall. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered. "Goodbye, Lena," he said, and turned away before she could see the sadness in his eyes. She walked out into the rain, her heart aching with everything that almost happened but didn't. She knew she would always remember that. Classroom not for the lessons about art, but for the lesson about herself. She had learned how easily the heart could blur the line between admiration and affection, between safety and passion, and though nothing truly happened, she knew she'd come dangerously close to something that could have changed her life forever. That night, as she sat by her window watching the rain, Lena finally let herself cry, not because she'd lost something, but because she'd finally realized how much she wanted to feel alive. The sound of the rain reminded her of his voice, calm and steady, and for the first time in weeks, she whispered to herself, "Be careful with your heart." It was a warning and a promise. The semester ended faster than Lena expected. Winter crept into Seattle, and with it came the final day of Ethan's class. The air in the art room felt colder than usual. And though everyone was chatting excitedly about break, Lena couldn't shake the heavy feeling in her chest. She knew this was the last time she'd see him. When Ethan entered the room, he looked the same as always, calm, confident, but something about him felt distant. Maybe it was because they both knew this was goodbye. He started the class with a short speech about growth and honesty, about how art wasn't just about beauty, but truth. His words carried weight, especially for Lena. Every sentence felt like it was meant for her. After the students turned in their final projects, Ethan began calling them one by one to discuss their grades and paintings. Lena watched from her seat, trying to keep her emotions in check. She knew what she felt for him wasn't something she could ever act on, but it didn't make the goodbye any easier. Every time he smiled at another student, her stomach twisted. She wanted him to look at her the way he used to, like she was the only one in the room. Finally, it was her turn. She walked up to his desk, her hands trembling slightly. Her final painting lay there, framed and complete, a storm breaking apart, sunlight piercing through the dark clouds. It was her most emotional piece, one she had poured her heart into. Ethan looked at it for a long moment before speaking. "This is powerful," he said softly. "It's not just a painting. It's a story." Lena looked at him, her throat tight. "It's how I felt this semester." He met her eyes, and for a few seconds, everything else disappeared. The class chatter, the sound of pencils dropping, even the rain outside. It was just the two of them again, standing in a quiet understanding that words could never fully express. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've changed, Lena. You've learned how to be honest with your art and yourself." She wanted to tell him everything she hadn't said the sleepless nights. The guilt, the way he had awakened something inside her she didn't know existed. But she couldn't. She just smiled sadly and said, "Thank you for seeing me." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, as if fighting something inside himself. "You're going to do amazing things," he said finally. "Don't let anyone dim what you've found." She opened her mouth to say something more, but he stood abruptly and handed her painting back. "Good work," he said, his tone suddenly formal. The wall between them was back. It hurt, but she understood why it had to be that way. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Goodbye, Ethan." He hesitated before replying. "Goodbye, Lena." The simple exchange felt heavier than any confession could. Outside, the sky was gray, and the wind carried the scent of rain. She walked slowly across campus, the cold air biting her cheeks. Each step felt like closing a chapter she wasn't ready to end. She knew she couldn't stay trapped in that longing forever, but it was hard to let go of something that had felt so real. That evening, Ryan picked her up from campus. He waved from his car, cheerful as ever, completely unaware of the emotional storm inside her. "So, it's over?" he asked as she got in. "No more classes." "Yeah," she said softly. "It's over." He smiled. "Good. Now we can focus on the future, on us." She nodded, forcing a smile. Of course. Ryan talked all the way home about their wedding plans, their future home, their families. Lena listened, but her mind drifted back to the art room, the sound of rain, Ethan's voice, the warmth of his words. It wasn't love in the traditional sense. It was something more complicated. He had been her mirror, her reminder of who she was before she started living by everyone else's expectations. That night, after Ryan fell asleep, Lena went to her small art corner by the window. Her painting of the storm sat propped against the wall. She traced the brushstrokes with her fingers, remembering every moment she had painted, the confusion, the hope, the pain. She realized then that Ethan had given her something she didn't expect. Not romance, but courage. The courage to admit she was lost and to find herself again through her art. The next morning, she packed away her college things. When she lifted her sketchbook, a note slipped out from between the pages. It was from Ethan. She recognized his handwriting instantly. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. "Lena, keep painting. You have a voice that deserves to be heard. Don't look back too long, your light is forward. E.R." Her eyes filled with tears. She sat on her bed, reading the note over and over until the ink began to blur. There was no romantic confession, no secret message, just encouragement. But that was enough. It was his goodbye, written in a way only he could. Years later, Lena would think back to that winter day often. She and Ryan eventually married, though life wasn't as perfect as they once dreamed. She built a small art studio downtown where she painted between her teaching hours. Her work began to gain attention for its honesty and emotional depth. When people asked what inspired her, she always smiled and said, "A teacher who once told me the truth matters more than perfection." One rainy afternoon, while preparing for an exhibition, she found herself staring out the window, watching the world blur in gray and silver. For a moment it felt like she was back in that classroom, the sound of brushes, the quiet warmth of his voice, the lesson he left behind. She smiled to herself, whispering, "Thank you, Ethan," before returning to her work. In the end, she understood that what happened between them wasn't about forbidden love or betrayal. It was about awakening, about realizing how fragile and powerful the human heart can be. Ethan hadn't broken her life. He had reminded her to live it honestly. Their story never needed a dramatic ending. It ended the moment they both chose to walk away, protecting what was left of their integrity and peace. But the memory of what they shared, those fleeting moments of understanding, stayed with her like a quiet echo, a reminder that sometimes people enter our lives not to stay, but to help us rediscover who we are. And though she never saw him again, she carried his lesson in every painting she created, every student she later taught. Years later, one of her students asked, "Who taught you how to feel so much through art?" Lena smiled softly, remembering that gray classroom, the storm outside, and the man who had once told her not to hide from truth. "Someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," she replied. The student didn't ask more, and Lena didn't explain. Some stories she had learned were meant to live quietly in the heart and finished, but unforgettable. That was how it ended. Not with regret, but with peace. Because sometimes the people who almost change our lives end up shaping them completely.